Hi, welcome to the Neural Nectar podcast. My name is Angel Alvarez, and I'm your host. Today, I'm going to be introducing you to what this is all about. Neural nectar. What does that even mean? So, the inspiration for this podcast comes from the idea that there are real people out there, right? You, the people listening, and then the many guests that I hope to have on this podcast. We've all got stories and we've all been through so many things, so many experiences, some very unique and special to who we are, and some that we've all been able to resonate with at some point in our life. So, when we have all of these experiences and these stories, and when we have this seemingly collective of what we call the human experience, how do we make sense of all of that? And how do we come to terms with our own existence? And for me, that question has been at the forefront of my life forever. Ever since I was little, why we exist, our purpose as human beings, the reason why we're on this planet, all of these questions have been, just circling and swirling in my mind. And for the longest time, I used religion to find the answers. And I took a very philosophical approach, and one that was based a lot on spirituality and thought and meditation. While that all sounds very good, it was all very biased and very jaded and very disembarked from real human experiences. I was very guarded from the world and from what the real world was like. And experiencing that head on for the first time in adulthood, all of that changed. So, all of this and much more is to come in this podcast. There's so many things that we are going to touch base on, beginning with my own story, delving into how certain psychological and neuroscientific topics come up in our life. I think that it's funny when we're reading something in the news and it's like scientists discovered gene CA24, and it's like, what the hell does that even mean? So I think that it's a good thing for us to meditate with science and to think about what all of these discoveries, what all of this research means for me and my life and how I live, right? What does it matter that, melatonin, circadian rhythms, and sleep cycles, and da 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 da, right? What does it matter that there is a gut brain axis? What does it matter that there are retinas and rods and cones in the eyes, and that when we perceive vision, it's all dependent on light and color doesn't exist? And there's just so many things that you read about, and you're like, what the hell? So, this podcast is going to serve as a meeting ground. This podcast is not only going to be a meeting ground for us as an audience and as a spectator of the guests and the listeners that will be participating, but it will also be a meeting ground in which you can take your life, or you'll be able to listen to the examples of the lives of the people on this podcast and how science and maybe other things like religion come up and how they affect and influence the outcomes or the decisions that one makes and takes in one's own life. So, as we delve into this, I want to begin with my story. So, I was born in 2000, August 19th, 2000. My parents are both Mexican. We are of Mexican, Italian, Spanish descent. It's a whole salad bowl worth of people. And I grew up a church kid. I grew up very, very religious. My parents were the type where we were in church 7 days a week. From the time when I was very little, I actually, from the moment I think I was like 3 years old, started to say I wanted to be a priest. It didn't start to be taken seriously until I was 8 years old and was still saying it. And then once I was in high school and I was still saying it, it kind of went on from there. And so growing up in that context and growing up in that environment, it was very interesting how a lot of my life became defined by religion. There wasn't a thing that I did that the Catholic Church didn't say do. And there was a thing that I didn't do that the Catholic Church didn't say don't do that. If I did something, it's because the church said to do it. And if I didn't do something or avoided doing something, it's because the church said to do exactly that. And I used to live my life strictly by the book, by the rules. I was very much a goody goody, in the conventional sense that I would go to sleep at night scared, that maybe I sinned that day, and if I died in my sleep, I would go to hell. So every night I would make a personal act of contrition to God, and then I would express my sorry and my grief for having sinned and caused Him pain, and I would reconcile all of those things and try to come to terms with the fact that if I died and I went to hell, that would be because I deserved it. And I was 8, 9 years old, making these decisions, coming upon these things. And then, you can imagine being very little and getting just notions and whiffs of the fact that I was gay. And when that started to become relevant in the context of a sermon, in the context of religion, and how much it was frowned upon, well, that kind of just wedged whatever type of sword that was already in there even further. So I think that from when I was very, very young, there was a lot of indoctrination. There was a lot of just what I would call almost like a suffocation, a smothering, right? That's kind of what religion does. It brainwashes you in that way, and forces you to think something, forces you to believe it, and you do that. It's your MO. You live by it, and that's it. And now I'm making it sound like all of it was bad, and that's absolutely not the case. I can actually give you many examples of when religion was very good to me, and I loved going to church. There was a reason why I was there. There was a reason why I wanted to be a priest. And it was because I experienced in my life that some of the greatest community leaders were our priests in our community, in our immediate community there by where I grew up. I even went to the Catholic school from 5th grade through 8th grade graduation. And our priest was one of our main community leaders. If even in legal matters, he would become involved in people's, in families' personal business, and they would involve him, and he'd find lawyers and he'd get them resources. That a lot of priests that have come and gone, I have met, have doubled not only as priests, but they've been counselors and mentors and social workers, and they've done many good things, and thankfully the ones that I've interacted with have all left really good impressions of what the priesthood could be. And for me, that was helping people. That's what I wanted to do. And so, having served as role models for me when I was little, I thought, oh, priesthood must be the way. And so, because religion was so good and my parents loved going to church, I of course thought, oh, this is the best thing I could pick. What would make my parents and my family more proud than that? And later on, as I was going through life, I started to lose my faith because something that kept coming up, something that kept resurfacing, was the fact that I didn't like girls, and that sometimes I would stare at a boy a little longer, or I would think about a boy when I was just in a different context, and someone would come to mind. But then I'd get quite like, you don't have a girlfriend, or whatever. Like, why aren't you chasing? And it was always like, oh no, whatever. I don't have time for that, or I'm not thinking about that right now, or just any excuse, just anything else. And then at some point it was, well, why aren't I? At some point it was, there's a reason for that. And it came to the point where I was 9, 10, 11. You're pretty young when you're a queer young person. It's at a very young age when you are hyper aware of your queerness. I think that that's something a lot of non-queer people will never understand. And it's something very unique to just standing out. People that are born with a disorder or a disability can kind of talk to a similar experience of never getting to know what this normalcy is like, never getting to be a part of this, like, oh my God, like, I don't have to think about why this is so different for me. It's always been different. And in my mind and in my heart, it's always been that way. It was always just different. And I think that once I reconciled that in my mind, right, this is me, I had a decision to make. I had to decide whether I was going to remain truthful to who I was once I discovered and realized this is who I am, or I was going to neglect that and deny that and maybe try something else. And so for the longest time, I did the latter. I lived as a religious person and I just, I swore off sexuality. I became celibate and I was like, unless it is attraction and feelings toward a woman, I'm not going to engage in anything. And I didn't. And I was very strict about it. And I was very church boy about it. And I had, a lot of encounters and experiences and interactions, with boys, girls, with men and women that have had, I've had to take them as data, right? For me, that was information. From when I was very little, I was a researcher. From when I was very little, I was a scientist because I wanted to know why I was different. Right? I wanted to know why I wasn't functioning like the rest and why I knew that. And so for me, all of these interactions that left a feeling, right, that left a something, right, a spike, I kept as data, as information. And throughout the years and as I got older, it became much more evident and much clearer that I'm gay, right? That I was gay then, gay now, thankfully. And I came out and I accepted that. But that comes up later. So at this point in my life, I realized that I was attracted to men. And so I decided that I was going to just continue my life in the shadows and I was just going to take up the religious life and deny all of that other stuff. And I did. And I would go through many, many prayers and many moments of meditation and all different sorts of types of penance is what they call it, mortification of the flesh, fasting, all sorts of things, sleeping on the floor. There were many moments in which I was genuinely trying to access, God. And then I was trying to like, look, dude, I didn't ask to be this way, but apparently I am. And some people say you made me this way. So if you could unmake me this way, that would be great. And from a very young age, I remember laying my head down to rest that night, and my prayer would be, change me, take this away, make it go away. I don't want to be like this. And I think that what would come up for me was that if I, especially as I was getting older, and the more relevant this became with puberty and hormones, that there was always this thing at church, sins of the flesh, right? The devil is always there in your ear whispering, tempting you. And I believe that there are devils and that there are demons and monsters that we all fight. It's just not the conventional ones that the church teaches us. It's not those types. It's very, very different types that we have that I will dedicate a whole other episode to in the future. But there's a lot more blockages that I think we experience at a psychological level, at a socio-emotional level, that really, really hinders our existence and our self-development as people and as an individual human being. And once I came to terms with the fact that I was different and the fact that I was going to live this lie, that really limited my freedom, that really limited my sense of independence and of autonomy, I gave it up, right? I consciously was like, I am not me. I'm giving it all up to God and I'm going to let Jesus live in me and I'm going to be just that. And so it was like every day I was just putting on this persona, right? Every day I was just acting and like pretending to be someone I'm not consciously. I almost like knew that I was doing it, and it ate at me every single. I fell into a deep depression. I think from when I was like 14, up through like college-ish, even just getting over it in the past 3 years. So it affected me for a long time, but it was that. It was the fact that I was not being authentic. It was the fact that I almost was so dedicating so much energy to denying myself and to and investing energy in being someone I'm not, that I had to invest energy in not being who I am. and to inhibiting that and decreasing that now it's like, whoa, everything comes up and it all, and I'm my full self, my authentic self. Thankfully, that's how the story goes. So sacrificing a lot of those things, growing up in the digital era, with social media, with internet, with technology being what it was, the first iPods, the first iPhones. Now we have MetaQuest and Oculus, and we've got people wanting to colonize Mars, and we have CRISPR editing DNA, and we've got stem cell research giving incubator babies. We have so many things that we are innovating in research and in technology and in science that it really brings to light all of the unstoppable things that have been going on over the past decades, from the year 2000 through now, 2024. How much has been done, how many innovative and amazing cool things have been reached. So, while all of this was happening in my life, right, all of this religiosity and all of this denying of the self, I was also looking at the world outside of my own home through my phone, through my iPad and the laptop, and just accessing the internet and seeing all of this and having YouTube and Vine at the time, and just all types of different trends that would come up. And even TV, right, was still a little more relevant back then than it is now, because now we all stream. But all of these things would be my access to the world, right? Because I feel like sometimes like those religious kids that you see like all dressed up funny, and like they don't know how to interact with people because they were completely shuttered away. I feel like I grew up like that a little because I was that much of a church kid. And now moving out of that awkwardness and being more so myself, um, in high school, all of that started to change. Once I graduated 8th grade, that summer, a lot changed for me because my parents actually split up. And so, having my father out of the picture, I stayed with my mom and thankfully lived with her and she loves me. But no longer having him around was a very, different experience, and left some repercussions in my psychology that I think I'm still working on sometimes, right? Obviously, there's always new levels, new devils, and self development is a constant state of growth, right? You can always learn more, you can always grow, and being open to that. But I think that I've worked a lot on that because my parents splitting up did leave a mark on me. And I think that anybody that has experienced something like that can say the same thing. And it's because at a moment you ask yourself why it happened. And especially when something like in my case, when neither parent has the emotional capacity to talk to me about in depth what happened, I kind of was just left wondering, you know. And for the longest time, I thought that my father left because he thought, or I should say, because he knew that I was gay, and because he suspected that I thought he left. And it wasn't until years later when I came out and I told my mom that, she was like, "Oh no, 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 no! Our problems were separate from you. Like he and I always had our issues, and we were always trying to work on them." And I found out that the reason they didn't stay together is because he didn't want to fully divorce his previous wife to be able to marry my mom, and she wanted to get married. Um, so once that came to light, that was very different and brought a lot of peace to me. Not that I necessarily needed it, because by then I had already done my own whatever, at peace with it done. But it did help. It did help, and it brought just the closure that I needed back then. And so having reconciled that, and moving through that still, even in high school and through the awkwardness of being gay and religious and trying to figure it all out, and figuring out college and what kind of career I want. The whole priesthood thing was just there, and it was there from the beginning. And so even though I knew who I was, I knew I made the decision that I wasn't going to be that person. My father wasn't around, and it was just really my mom, my brother. We were heavily relying on each other. I think that for the sake of not wanting to be a burden, for the sake of not wanting to cause trouble, for the sake of not wanting to break my mother's heart when so much shit had already hit the fan, right? Like, dad was gone. Like, there's just so much that at the time in high school, I was like, I'm not coming out. I'm not gonna do this. Like, I'm not gonna be that kid. I just thought that it would send too many ripples, right? I thought that it would be too much of a storm to take on at the time. And for whatever reason, I didn't come out, and I chose not to. And, I didn't until much later. But I think that it was a decision that I made at that point in time almost for myself, right? The first time when I denied myself for religious purposes and was like, no, I'm not going to come out, da 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 da. I did it because I wanted to be faithful to God and to religion and whatnot. And this time in high school, I was starting to do it more so because I'm like, this is for me. I'm not ready yet. And so that motion started within me I'm not going to do this much longer. I was already not wanting to be a priest anymore. And I was already not wanting to go to church. And I was already not wanting to be religious and wanting to express myself and be myself and embrace all of that. So all of this little rebellion was coming up. It started from, again, at the same time when all of this stuff was happening, when all these decisions like, oh, I'm going to stick to religion and follow it, I also wasn't believing in God anymore. I was like 8 or 9 years old when I stopped believing in God. And it was because I didn't believe that there was somebody there actually listening to my prayers. I didn't get any evidence of that. I didn't get any direct evidence of I'm asking for this and I'm getting it ever when I prayed. And I'm like, okay, so what am I actually praying to? What am I actually praying for? Or where is this God when we ask for things and we don't get them? And I decided back then, like, oh, well, obviously there's no one there listening. And, that was a very childish reason to not believe, but it was reason enough at the time, and I stopped believing. So in high school, when all of this became relevant, my atheism grew, but I was still in church and I was still going, and I didn't want to upset my mom and imbalance the household. So I was sticking to religion and I was sticking to being a spiritual person, and I was still going through with seminary. So much that I joined a high school program and I was going to a seminary once a month to get oriented by some people there. And it came to the point where I was deciding near the end of high school, right near the end, near senior year, um, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go to college? And if I wasn't accepted into seminary for whatever, I was a really good student. I had a high GPA. Any extracurricular, you could name it, and I was in it. Yearbook, you could anything you want. I was a really top tier student back then. And if I wasn't accepted in seminary for whatever reason, I'm like, fine. If theology doesn't work out, the next thing I'll do is psychology. That was always my guilty pleasure. Psychology has always been in the back burner of my mind because when I was, again, a lot of this happened when I was very young. I was very little. I had a laptop and I had access to internet, and I would just Google everything. Maybe some things I shouldn't have been Googling, but at some point I read Sigmund Freud's interpretation of dreams, and I was like 12 or like very young. But point is that I became very interested in psychology when I was very little, and I'm glad that I did because once I was in college and even in high school, deciding what I was going to study, that was always my second choice, anything psychology. Um, at the time, seminary accepted me and they gave me a full scholarship, and I was able to go, and it was a wonderful experience. So I took it and I went. I took it and I went. The full ride scholarship was more so the most motivating reason to have gone and picked that choice. But it was also the fact that I had just dedicated so many years of my life already to the church and to developing connections there and to growing in the community there that I was like, what the hell? We'll just try it. And I did. And I went to seminary for 2 years, and it was interesting. I didn't expect that it would be set up the way it was, but it was not bad because it was kind of like a fraternity in which you kind of lived with a bunch of guys. Like you had your own room and maybe you had a roommate, but like it was just kind of like a big old frat. And it wasn't bad because most of the people there were nice and like talkative and social. But there were just a few sour apples there that just, you kind of whatever. And I very much so think that from whatever other context was that was there, I took it as a time. I'm in college, and I was like, I'm out here, bitch. Like, and I was at Loyola University, which is on the north side of Chicago. It's in like the Rogers Park area. Beautiful campus, by the way. It's right by the lake. I would go on my walks. Like, I would go out. I would sneak out, and I would go. Don't tell the seminary this, but like, I was living my life and enjoying the college experience, and at the same time developing myself, right? While I was dedicating time to this and following all the rules, we'll get into that in a moment, I was also living my college experiences and living my college life. And I think that the ability to have done these two together was the greatest gift that I gave myself. So, in fact, really, going to seminary became a favor that I did to myself. And I'll explain why in a moment. But for me, it was cool that I was taking this seriously, right? These vows, this religious stuff, prayer, meditation. But I was also going out, meeting people, going to parties, and doing some things that I shouldn't have done at the time because I had to follow certain rules being a seminarian. There are three rules that you follow. You do something called a consecration, right? In which you like kneel in front of a man, and they put their hands on you and they pray over you, and it's a whole cultish thing. And you got to promise, right, to God and to the church that you are going to live by celibacy, which means no sex and no relationships and none of that. Like, you can't do none of that. You can't touch somebody, they can't touch you, you can't look at them, they can't look at you, can't think about them. Actually, masturbation is a mortal sin. So you can't even touch yourself anyway. So, like, all of that was just off the table. You can't do any of it. And you had to promise that, and you had to promise obedience, full and complete submission. Like, it was whatever the church says, that's what I do. That's what you promise. And then the third one is poverty. So not only can you not fuck, not only can you not do whatever the fuck you want, you also are too broke to buy whatever you want or go anywhere or do anything. So unless the church is giving it to you, you're not taking it. And unless the church says you can have it, it can stay right where it's at. So making all of these promises and living such an intense life, I'm glad, because you really get to see and experience what it's going to be like later. Because it's only going to get worse. Like, if I really were to become a priest, like, oh my God, I can't even imagine. You made all of these promises, and I think that I got to experience that, and I'm grateful for it, because I got to realize that that's not what I wanted. And I got to 100% realize that I wasn't feeling it. And I knew I wasn't feeling it, especially because, and here's the really juicy details, I became romantically involved with another guy who's also in seminary. Yeah, that's the scandal of my life. Like, actually, though, because I was like, for the longest time, the church kid, never came out, and I was always supposed to be a priest, right? Well, I'm at the school to become a priest, and all of a sudden I thought I fell in love with this guy. And it was a very naive and like childish relationship and attraction and everything, because it was like, whatever, like a very first and only experience, because I think what it was is we were both in this context of like, we're in seminary, ain't nobody else here that we could like really talk to about, girl, you kiki? Because I kiki, you know what I mean? So like, the way he and I found out was we were kind of just studying one day. I forget what I said or what I did. I was probably just gay as fuck about it. And he like looked at me and he stared at me. He told me that he was gay. And I didn't say it at first. I was like, oh, okay, cool, man, like whatever. And then like the next day, like we were like eating lunch or something, and I was like, hey, can we go on a walk? And we did. And I was like, I'm gay too. I don't know why I waited like a day to say it back, but I did. And it was whatever, but we eventually developed a friendship that became a relationship. And I think that the reason why that was what it was at the moment that it was is because we became a solace for each other, right? Like we depended on each other a lot, because where we were at in life, mentally, physically, like it was like, bitch, we don't want to be here. So at least the moments that we were able to share in private and intimacy with each other were moments that we were able to be very authentic, or moments that we were able to just really be ourselves and express a side of ourselves that we have just been repressing for so long. And we would go out and we would go like on little dates and like be gay in front of people and like just very far, like if the seminary was like here, we would go like to this side of the city and like go out there and like have fun. But that ended when it ended because we were caught up. And we were caught up by someone who was also in seminary and kind of put up against the wall. And so we went to the priest and we were like, hey, we are in a relationship and we know that that's a problem. So what are we going to do? So we both got kicked out. And it was, on my end at least, half a religion, half a decision, half a obligation. Because I was kind of like told, you can remain in this relationship and leave, or you can decide to stay, but you have to discontinue all connection and like you cannot even see each other. And I was like, regardless, I don't want to be here anymore. So I was like, I'm going home. Like, I don't care. I'm going home. And okay, they were like, fine, here's your dismissal. And I was like, great, thanks, bye. And that was a conversation on Wednesday. I was home Saturday morning. And it was great. It was great. Just that, he and I never spoke since, right? Ever since we parted ways at seminary. And, he came back to where he's from and I came back to where I'm from. Never spoke again. And even through COVID and everything, I found out that him and his mother got sick and some family members, and I reached out on multiple occasions to catch up and to reconnect and to find out if they were alive. And I never heard back. So I moved on. And it was a very painful experience because I think that it was like we just got kicked out together. Like, we were in this together. Like, what the fuck? So having been discarded so disgracefully, it was kind of like, okay, whatever, fine. And it hurt. It hurt a lot, but I got over it. I got over it like we always do because we are survivors. And I think that there were many lessons there that were taken from seminary and from college and from moving away. At some point, we left to Minnesota. So there were so many experiences and so much learning and so much growth, having been away from my family, so away from my family, and just with all these guys and all these people and middle of fucking nowhere. There was so much that I took that I cannot say that it was all shit, right? That I cannot say that I hated it completely because no, I still have friends to this day that are in seminary and some that also left and some that, knew me that were never in seminary and that were there then and are still my friends now and support me. So I know that there are good people out there, right? There are a lot of lessons like that in my mind and my heart, that not everybody is an asshole, right? And that even in religious places, you can find people that are wholesome. And I think that at that point in my life, what became at the forefront was now what, right? I had no religion, right? Because I was gone from seminary and I didn't want to practice anymore. Absolutely not. And then I had the crisis of, well, COVID is here, so no school, right? It's all online. Well, regardless, at the time, I had to transfer, right? Because I was at a university in Minnesota. I had to come back to Chicago. I transferred to a university here, Roosevelt, my awesome school. And there were no classes. I didn't transfer in time to register. So it was COVID. I had nowhere to be, couldn't go out of the house. I didn't have classes to keep me busy. I didn't have a Switch at the time to play with. All I had was internet, Apple TV, and my family members that I lived with, my sister and her husband. And so the three of us became very close. We would play games, board games, and cards, and just whatever the fuck we could find. And COVID was just as interesting for me as it was for the rest of the world. And I couldn't even tell you, like, there were many, I'm not laughing about it, but that's just kind of the emotional response. We lost family members to COVID. And like, it was where like, on Friday, I got a call from my mom. Oh my God, my uncle just died from COVID. Oh my God, we were all crying, da 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 da. And then like the next week, like Wednesday, oh my God, my aunt just died. Oh my God, my aunt just died, da da da. And like the next week, someone else, like it happened where like 5 weeks in a row, people were dying. By the 5th week, I was just like, oh my God. I saw my mom was calling. I swear to God, I wasn't trying to be mean, but I just clicked and I was like, who died now? And she started laughing, and so did I. But she was like, "You're right, someone died." I was like, "Oh my God, you gotta be fucking kidding me." So COVID was just as bad for me as it was for everybody else. But I was also experiencing this like existential crisis. I had just lost my religion and my purpose and my direction in life. I lost school, I wasn't working, and now all of this was shut down. So I had a lot of thinking to do. And I had a lot of meditating to do. I started therapy. I started to change my life, right? And I realized that religion had left so many cognitive structures and processes in my mind, ways of thinking, things that I was believing and things that I was doing that weren't serving me and that I had to let go, but that were very painful. They were a part of me from when I was very little. And it's painful to part ways with your ways of thinking and the things you believe in case if you've never done it. But if you have to sit there and rethink your entire life, that's hard fucking work. If for 20 years you were thinking and believing there's a God that is looking out for me, that loves me, all things are going to work out because there's heaven anyway that comes after this shitty life, and then you realize that none of it is real, it's like, well, what the fuck now? I just wasted 20 years dedicating time to this shithead. So now what? So now I got to dedicate time to me. And so it was a lot of restructuring and reconfiguring of my life and of my ways of thinking and of how I was doing things and why I was doing things. So it led me down a route that now prioritizes my own authenticity and my own happiness. I think that even in my academic struggles, right? Like I was affected academically. I went into depression. I experienced anxiety like a motherfucker. My family members, actually, I don't think all of my family members know that I was on antidepressants for a moment. I think I only told my mom. But I took antidepressants for like 6 months, and it only lasted 6 months because at that point I was like, my psychiatrist was like, "Do you want a refill?" I said no. I said I want to try something else because I did not like how I did not like the zombifying experience, the numbing experience of like I didn't want to live like that, and so I'm like, I'm gonna make drastic changes. I'm gonna just like, oh my God, I'm gonna just everything. And I started exercising like a motherfucker, and I started drinking water a lot and hydrating and taking vitamins and eating healthy and like just picking like better food options and like not eating shit or trying not to as often. And if I do, I burn it off. You know, like that's the exchange. So there were things like that, like lifestyle choices that I had to make. Um, that I'm not blaming religion for at that point, but there were just so many ways of thinking and believing that are no longer there, thankfully. That now this route, right, this road that it has led me down has been one of, I always say, you know, our life is a constant summation of our knowledge with our experiences. Like everything that you do, right, you do it because you either have memory of that or it's relevant to what you're experiencing in that present moment. And I think that the complexity of what it means to be a human being and what it means to be alive, we take that for granted, right? You're alive, I'm alive, we're all alive. But what the fuck does that even mean? And you know, when you think about it from a religious aspect, you get all of this like purpose and divine destiny and fate and bullshit. But when you think about it from just being a human being that fucking experiences life every day, right? I think about it from a biological perspective, psychology, neuroscience. Where does that get me? A bunch of cells, a bunch of systems, a bunch of shit that just works together to make this bitch. But that still doesn't explain me, you know? And I think that at the end and be all and end all, the very definitive experience of what it means to be a human is to understand that there is a me, right? It's consciousness. It's this sense of me-ness. What does it mean to be angel? What does it mean to be you, right? What does it mean to be alive, right? I don't know why I'm alive. I just am. But that's exactly why there is that's the freedom that comes. I have regained my freedom that I took away from myself when I adopted religion Now that I don't, and now that I follow my own beliefs more solely based on science, really, I take an idea of freedom that comes with this life has no purpose. This life is meaningless. So I give it meaning. I give it the meaning that I want to give it. I establish whatever purpose I want, whatever direction I want for my own life. I'm no longer allowing someone else to write my story. I'm writing it now. And I think that the greatest metaphor I've ever written, and it was something that I wrote in my journal like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right after therapy. I rushed and I grabbed it. And I was like, I said this to my therapist and I need to repeat it so I never forget it again. But it was, I'm taking the pen out of the hands of both God and the devil, and I'm putting it back in mine. And I think that that's something that all of us need to do. Right? Whether you believe in God and in religion and you're a spiritual person and whatnot, you still need to take charge of your own life. You still need to be accountable and responsible for yourself. You cannot, allow generalizations and broad assumptions to explain your entire existence. Or, if you don't know, you can't just, well, I don't know, so it must be that. No, find out. Ask questions. Be a skeptic. Look, That's why we invented microscopes, because we want to get to the nitty-gritty of what's in there. But that's even why we invented telescopes, because we want to look out there and see what more there is. So there's always more to see. There's always more to find. Never take the easy route. Never take the short answer. Never take the, it's bullshit. It's going to keep you right there. Right where you were at, that's where it's going to keep you. You have to go deeper. There's always layers. So never take anything for face value. Always think critically. And actually that's something that I got from a theology professor. He was a theology professor. He was an Anglican priest. And he always said, Angel, never take this theology stuff as what it is. Always think critically when you're thinking about it. And he turned me atheist. So I invite every one of you to always think critically about your life, about your existence, about your choices, about who you are, and be authentic, right? Is what you're doing now authentic to who you want to be tomorrow, right? Is the way you're living and thinking really who you want to be in 10 or 15 years? Why not be who you want to be every day? Why do you have to wait, right, for something? Don't wait. Be you. And I just want to thank each and every single one of you for joining me today on this episode of Neural Nectar. And I hope to see you again in the future. Tune in, and I will be bringing some more riveting and invigorating stories for you. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will catch you in the future.